Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to your cybersecurity series. My name is Vlad, and together every week we learn a bit more about cybersecurity. In the previous episodes, I gave you two examples of how smart the hackers can be, and it's not really about their technical skills or hacking skills, it's really about the mindset and what they are trying to achieve. In the Carbanak example, what we have seen is that they were not focusing on a single type of vulnerability and trying to exploit a certain configuration, but rather they were studying what the employees in the banks were doing. They were taking screenshots, they were taking some records of the keystrokes, and they were learning as they go, just like regular employees, in order to carry a fraud on any of the bank, regardless of their infrastructure. In the previous episode, we talked about how hackers can be also smart in the way they carry out their objectives. I gave you the example of the French election campaign where hackers, rather than just extracting data and publishing it for the public or the media, they decided to slice and mix real data with fraudulent data, making it an attack on not only the confidentiality but also the integrity, even though in the end the election was not tampered with. It's really the idea that we are trying to understand further, and I think this was a really nice example. In today's video, I will give you a third example of how smart attackers can be and how they can combine their own expertise. And it's really the spirit of today's episode, and you will see there are a lot of similarities with the famous Wolf of Wall Street TV movie. And we will also talk about securities fraud. Not in detail, I'm not a financial expert, but we will do talk a bit about this context and how they have merged their competencies together. So starting off with our protagonist today, we have two main hackers. One of them is named Ivan Turchynov, and the second one, Oleksandr Ieremenko. Basically, they are both from Ukraine. I mean, Ivan is apparently from also Moldova or Romania. They were both born quite recently, 87 and 91 for the second one. Those pictures are actually coming from the official US government Secret Service pages because they are both actually wanted still today. What are they wanted for? Basically, they have been charged in 2015 for a certain number of reasons, including wire fraud conspiracy, securities fraud in general, and as you can see, computer fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering. So that's a huge rap sheet. So they were charged, but not convicted, and that's an important part. Simply because there was never a trial, they were never arrested, and even to this day, the U.S. government is offering $1 million as a reward for any information leading to the arrest or the conviction, especially of the second one, which is Ieremenko. And so those two guys, they were part of a group of hackers located mostly in Ukraine, but also working and traveling around. And I have found this amazing story, which I really encourage you to have a look and read it in depth. It's on The Verge, theverge.com. I will put the link in the description so it's easier for you. It's quite a long read. I think it takes 20 to 30 minutes to get through the article. It's really in depth, but honestly, you could really make a movie out of it because it has basically everything. Mafia mobs, mobsters in general. There is some underground hacking groups, guys from Russia traveling in the US, in Mexico, cartels, politics, religion. It has basically everything in the story, but here today we will, of course, focus more on the cybersecurity elements. So the idea is that those guys, so Turchinov and Ieremenko, they wanted to make money, just like any other hacker. And rather than targeting the banks, as we have seen in the Carbanak example, they thought, well, maybe there is another way of making money fast. And it's basically targeting newswire companies. So they targeted websites like Business Wire or other companies, and those media are famous for holding confidential information. So here we are talking about company reports, regulatory announcements, everything that is kind of confidential and only published to the media, to the public at a certain date. So, for example, it can be an announcement about a new product launch, it can be an announcement about acquiring or merging two companies together, or it can also be financial statements. So when you have companies that are making quarterly earnings reports, or announcing that maybe their product was not so efficient compared to their projections, those kind of statements are heavily looked after by the investors, because of course the share price is evolving and you can see a lot of movements in trading around those period of time. And those guys with IT skills and cybersecurity skills decided to specifically target those companies in order to acquire privileged insider information. Here, I just highlight one of the extracts in the article, and just to give you a concrete example, because those guys, they were doing it since 2009 and even after 2015 and 16 and 17. Basically, here we have an example on August 3rd, 2011. There was this press release from a pharmaceutical company called Dendrion, and it was published on one of the websites. So when I say published, I mean uploaded, sorry, as a draft. So nobody still had access to it, and it was uploaded at 3:34 p.m. And it was published half an hour right after that. And what's interesting is that in between the upload of the file, which was still in draft mode and only readable by the author and a few people who had access, and published for the entire world to see at 4:01 p.m. Basically, the hackers got the information, and what they have seen is that the hackers, they were not working on their own. They don't have financial competencies. They don't have a lot of cash on hand, or they don't really know how to make investment themselves, but they were working in pairs with financial advisors and traders. And those traders here, they are mentioning the Korchevsky, which is one of the guys involved in the story. I'm sorry if you are from Western Europe or the US, those names are a bit sometimes complex to get around. But basically, this guy is a trader, and he has purchased 1,100 put options, and basically he is betting on whether or not this company action price will go up or down. And of course, on the very next day, the stock completely fell by 67%. And the idea is that the guy was able to cash out almost $2.3 million. So the guy already had the information about the fact that their new product was not as performant, as lucrative as they had anticipated. So he managed to sell his positions at a very advantageous price, where everybody else basically lost money or didn't have this kind of information. So it's really the idea of insider trading. So it's nothing new. But what's interesting in this case is that cyber hackers were really working together with financial analysts and traders. And together they committed insider fraud. So, speaking of the consequences, as you can imagine, every time if you pull out $2 million, few $1 million, at some point you are going to catch the attention from the authorities. And more specifically, you have to know that in this example, the cyber hackers and the traders, they were working hand in hand, and they were also splitting the benefits. So the traders, they would cash out 50% of the money, they would give 40% to the hackers, and 10% to the intermediaries who allowed all of that to happen together. But then, nevertheless, this entire bubble and this entire operation, it got bigger and bigger. And in 2012, those hackers that I told you about, they already had acquired several properties, especially in Kiev, which is the capital of Ukraine. They had superb houses in some of the most fancy neighborhoods. They had luxury cars. They had golden watches. They had weapons. They were partying like crazy, just like in The Wolf of Wall Street. Which is why I think there is a lot of similarities in between this movie and what happened in this story, which could honestly be turned into a fantastic movie. But at some point, the authorities from Ukraine, but also working with the US, so the Secret Service and the FBI, they decided that enough was enough and they conducted a raid on some of the properties. They confiscated a lot of laptops and IT equipment in general, including mobile phones, and by doing some forensic analysis, they were able to pull out some conversations, some logs, information on the different calls, on text messages. Apparently, they were using Viber at the time, but basically, it's an equivalent to WhatsApp. So they managed to pull all of this information and start to connect the dots in between the different stakeholders and the different fraudsters, or how this entire network was operated. However, it was still, let's say, sometimes too situational or too controversial in order to charge all of the members, because then, of course, they can claim that they were not aware of some certain elements, that their identity were stolen, or, I mean, there are many differences that are possible, which is why not all of those members were charged accordingly. Nevertheless, the two hackers that we are talking about today, they both were charged, even though not convicted, because there was never a trial, they were never arrested. And that's maybe a question you might have. How is it possible that after a significant raid from the FBI, Secret Service, and Ukrainian authorities, how did they manage to miss those guys? Um, Here, it's a hint. We are not completely sure, but apparently it is because they would have allegedly bribed some of the Ukrainian authorities and managed to escape. They also apparently worked at some point from the Ukrainian authorities or some other Ukrainian groups of hackers, because, I mean, those guys, they definitely had some interesting skills. So that's why they were recruited and not really, I mean, they managed to get away from the US authorities. And you also need to understand that there is no extradition in between Ukraine and the US, which is why those two guys, they are still at large. And today, the US government is still offering payments for any information leading to their arrest or conviction. When we look at the end of the story, basically, I told you it was a group of hackers working together. So it was not only two individuals, even though I'm only featuring two of them today. There was a third one, and this guy got arrested because he was traveling in Mexico, and at some point, to escape the authorities, he was led into a plane, and he thought that the plane would go back to Ukraine. However, the plane was directly led to the US, and it's one of these movies moments where the fraudster gets up, believes that he's safe, he wants to get out of the plane. However, the other guys in front of him, they got up and they were actual FBI agents. So just like in the movie scene, he was immediately arrested, and prosecuted, and in the end convicted to 30 months of prison. So 2 years and a half. And even though he was questioned, in the end, they did not have sufficient information to convict or further investigate the other hackers and the other members within this organized crime network. As a conclusion, and that's the last extract of the article that I'm showing here. At the time of the article, we are in 2018, so it's 7 years ago. But still, this is an interesting story because it was at the time claimed to be one of the largest known computer hacking and securities fraud in the world. In total, they estimated that the fraudulent earnings went even beyond the 100 million dollars of earnings. For your information, if you read out the article, you will see that the SEC, which is the regulator on the Security and Exchange Commission, the US regulator, managed to pull some of those funds back. I think they managed to catch almost half of it, or 50, 56 million. However, this 100 million figure is grossly estimated and could be way higher than that. Nevertheless, that's the main idea of this video, is to show you that on top of being smart in their techniques, those guys are really getting organized, and they manage to combine the skills of different fraudsters Here we have computer fraud, we also have wire and securities fraud, and those guys manage to find themselves, they network together, they pool their own resources together to commit bigger crime in general. And that was my idea today. I just want to leave you on that note with this concept of really organized crime, mixing the strategies, mixing the talents for bad, or for, if you say, fraud, or in this case, what I find to be a brilliant fraud. I hope you liked it and see you in the next video.